The objective of the lesson is the draping and drafting of collars. Collars may be developed by draping or by the flat pattern method, or a combination of both. Collars, regardless of their outward shape or style, are classified into three categories: flat collars, rolled collars, stand-up collars. Flat collars rest on the body of the garment. Rolled collars go up partially on the neck of the body, roll over on itself, and rest on the garment. The shoulder of the body is drawn to show the relationship of the body and the stand. Stand-up collars rise above the neckline of the garment onto the neck of the body. No portion of the collar rests on the body of the garment. To prepare for the muslin, measure the depth of the collar plus an additional 9 inches and measure the length to the muslin. To measure for the width of the muslin, measure from the center back of the garment to the shoulder and add an additional 2 inches. Establish a center-back line approximately 1 inch from the edge of the muslin and measure from the lower edge of the muslin the approximate depth of the collar. Pin center back of collar muslin to the center back of the figure. Proceed to keep the grain straight across the back of the figure. Pin at the neckline and slash to the pin. Smooth the collar muslin, pin and slash to the pin line. Come around the figure and again smooth the muslin, pin to the neckline and slash to the pin. Continue the procedure to the center front of the garment, slashing approximately every 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch up to the neckline. Remove the excess fabric and adjust the muslin for a smooth line. Check the back of the muslin. If the cross grain of the muslin is too far down, it will create fullness in the back. And if it is pulled upward, it will make the collar outside portion tighter. Once the collar is draped, mark the neckline of the collar to correspond with the neckline of the muslin on the figure. That would be the new neckline. mark to the center front. To determine a style on the outside edge, you can design or style using style tape, keeping the front portion of the collar in the style that you desire. Another method of achieving a design or style line on the outside edge is to measure a distance from the outside portion of the collar. So that would be another method. Once the desired collar line or the style line is achieved, mark the style tape using either the inside area or the outside area. Remove the collar from the figure and place on a flat surface to true. We will now true the styled markings. Blend the majority of the marks. Keep the back portion of the collar straight for approximately a ½ inch and blend the style lines to correspond to the tape marks. Occasionally an adjustment is desired for a smoother line. Once the collar is made, you may add seam allowance, and seam allowance is added to the outside edge. Seam allowance is approximately a ½ inch, and when the collar goes into production, it will be reduced to a ¼ inch. In order for the collar to hide the seam line, once it is attached to the neckline of the garment, a slight adjustment must be made, and the adjustment will turn the collar over, producing a minimal roll and hide the seam line. To achieve that, from the line drawn on the collar, come upward about an 1/8 inch and blend the 1/8 inch line so that it will diminish halfway to the front of the collar. True this line, and by raising the collar as such, you have tightened the neckline of the collar so that when it is placed on the neckline of the garment, it will be a little bit smaller. To this measurement, add a ½ inch seam allowance. Collar to the new neckline of the garment, matching cross mark of the collar to the shoulder of the garment. Notice the slight roll at the neckline of the collar because of the adjustment. This is the flat collar. Another method of achieving a flat collar is to draft the collar or pattern make the collar. In order to achieve that, you are to remove the garment from the form, open the side seams, unpin the shoulder, and press the garment flat. Pin neckline and shoulder to the neckline and shoulder of the back to the neckline and shoulder of the front. And in order to achieve that slight roll that we arrived at in draping, overlap the shoulder of the front and the shoulder of the back anywhere from 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. This is the position of the overlap. At this point, I can see through the front part of my garment. Preparing the muslin will be the same as preparing the muslin for the draped collar. And once prepared, position the grain line of the muslin of the collar to the grain line of the muslin of the garment. Lift the collar of the garment following the new neckline. This portion may be trued directly. Cross mark where the collar intersects with the garment at the shoulder. You may measure the depth of the collar or the stylized line of the collar from the neckline of the muslin. Remember to true a line square to the center back of the collar, using whatever tool is appropriate, true the collar line. Occasionally a different slate curve is needed. Now at the front of the collar, you may leave the collar straight, or you may stylize it following a Peter Pan shape. To the style line, add seam allowance. And to the neckline, add seam allowance. This is the flat pattern method of arriving at a flat collar. Notice how the collar falls flat on the body of the garment. When developing a collar by the flat pattern method, the collar must be tested to perfect any discrepancy in the fit and any correction in the style line. At that time, the collar is placed on the figure to make the corrections. We will develop that fitting and correcting procedure in subsequent collar designs. Draping the rolled collar. In order to prepare the muslin, measure the height of the stand and the depth of the collar desired, and to that measurement add 15 inches. To measure for the width of the muslin, measure from the center back of the form to the shoulder, and to that measurement add 2 inches. When the muslin has been prepared, establish a center back line 1 inch from the edge. Measure up the depth plus the stand of the collar desired and place a mark. Position the muslin of the collar to the center back of the garment. Smooth the muslin and proceed to drape as for the flat collar. The initial steps are the same. It's a matter of smoothing, pinning, and slashing to the neckline edge around the entire neckline to the center front of the garment. Remove the excess. Do not mark the neckline at this time, as it will change. In order to initiate the roll, remove the pins holding the muslin to the garment. Lift the muslin at the center back to establish the roll desired. Note how the muslin rises up on the neckline to establish the roll. You have control of the style and the height of the roll. You may design a low roll or a very high roll. Keep the roll maximum height 1 inch. Do not exceed more than 1 inch as the collar becomes uncomfortable on the neckline. When the roll is established, pin the roll to the neckline of the figure, pin the muslin to the neckline, to the center back of the garment. Proceed to lift the muslin at the shoulder of the form. Notice what's happening to the muslin as it comes around the back. In order for that roll to wrap around the figure, remove the pins holding the muslin to the neckline. Manipulate and pull the muslin. Notice what's happening at the neckline. As the muslin wraps around the neckline, it needs to be slashed to release the pull onto the muslin. And manipulate and pull until the desired roll wraps around the neckline. At times, the muslin will pull across the shoulder because it is too wide. Trim the muslin and clip if necessary. Continue to smooth the muslin over the body, lifting the neckline to achieve a smooth edge. Trim away the excess so that the line is easier to manipulate. When the desired roll is achieved, then proceed to mark. Remember to mark the lowered neckline, mark the intersection, and mark the neckline across the back. Mark the roll line of the stand. For the outside edge of the collar, position the style tape following whatever style and depth is desired. When the style is what you want, proceed to mark. Remove the muslin from the form. And place on a flat surface for truing. True the neckline edge blending any discrepancies. After truing, establish seam allowance. And establish seam allowance around the neckline. Trim away the excess. And pin the collar to the figure for testing. Pin the collar of the neckline to the collar of the figure at the new neckline mark. If additional clipping is needed, clip the collar to relieve stress and tension. Bring the collar over and notice how the collar, when it rolls, it comes back to the original roll line where you have designed the stand, and it comes around and rolls, forming a stand in the back diminishing to the center front. And this is the draping procedure of the rolled collar. Drafting the rolled collar. In order to draft the rolled collar, remove the muslin from the form, unpin the shoulder, unpin the side seams, and press. Pin the shoulder and neckline of the muslin together and overlap the shoulder and armhole area of the muslin the desired amount to create the stand you want. This chart is being offered as a guide. Also notice that I have markings on my muslin at the 1-inch mark, at the 2-inch mark, the 3-inch mark, the 4-inch mark. The more I overlap the shoulder, also notice that I have markings on my muslin at the 1-inch mark, at the 2-inch mark, the 3-inch mark, the 4-inch mark. The more I overlap the shoulder, the higher the stand I will design. I will overlap the muslin 2 inches for this particular lesson. The original shoulder of the front to the 2-inch overlap of the back. Prepare the muslin the same as for draping, and position center back of muslin, collar muslin, to the center back of the garment muslin. Lift the neckline from the garment muslin, cross mark where the front and back shoulder intersect, and design the depth of the collar. Measure from the neckline around. Again, the front of the collar may be made rounded or shaped according to any style you desire. Blend the outside edge of the collar and then add seam allowance. Add seam allowance to the neckline edge. The collar at this time appears to be laying flat on the muslin, but once the muslin is pinned again to its normal shoulder line, you will notice that the collar, in order to fit, raises and forms a stand. We need to true this collar by testing it on the form. Remove the collar and you would be pinning the garment together again, clipping the neck edge of the collar in order to fit on the form, and proceed to pin the collar to the garment for testing. Many times the neckline edge needs to be refined, and at times the outside edge needs to be adjusted. Pin the garment to the form, test to see if any of the areas need to be lifted. Notice how there is room in this area of the collar, that it does not rest on the body. In order to make the collar rest on the body and smooth, you are to lift it. When you smooth the muslin on the shoulder, notice what's happening to the neckline area here. So to true the neckline and correct the neckline area, release the muslin so that the muslin comes to the front side of the garment, and smooth. Notice what is happening to that line in order to arrive at a better fit. Correct the markings and you'll notice that there has been a difference. While I have this on the figure, I'm going to mark the roll line so that that will be established. Remove from the figure and true the correction. To the corrected line, add seam allowance. Test the collar again. Placing the corrected neckline to the neckline of the garment. Now notice how the collar has achieved its roll and the collar rests flat on the body. and it meets at the center front where it was designed to meet. Another way of drafting the collar is to draft the collar using neckline measurements only. Either on the table or from the form, measure the neckline from the center back to the shoulder line. Record that measurement. Then measure from the shoulder line around the new neckline to the center front and record that measurement. Establish a block of fabric approximately 15 by 15. From the center back line, or from the edge of the muslin, establish a center back line 1 inch from the edge. 1 inch from the lower edge of the muslin, establish a guide line. For my demonstration, I will measure upward 3 inches from the guide line and place a mark. This will be the start of the neckline of the collar. Parallel to the guide line, draw a line that is the measurement of your center back measurement. So the measurement placed at this point will correspond to the measurement from the center back of the garment to the shoulder. Using the measurement from the shoulder to the center front, position that measurement from the cross mark, which indicates the shoulder, down to the guide line. From the shoulder down to the guide line, draw a line. The end of that line will be the center front of your collar. The guide line at the top is your shoulder, and this area is the center back of the collar. This entire area is the neckline. Blend the area in between here to arrive at a smoother line. Notice that the new line moves inward about 1/8 of an inch from the front neck guide line. To this measurement, add a 1/2 inch. This will be the seam line of the neckline. The curve of the neckline. Now from this particular neckline seam, you may design the collar the depth that you wish to style it. And again, from the front line, in order to create a very beautiful curve that sits on the body away from the neckline, draw a line at a 45-degree angle to the center front, and then curve the line for a nice Peter Pan roll. Blend the lines, and to the outside measurement, add a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Clip the neckline, and as in the first method of drafting the roll collar, This particular collar needs to be tested to correct the neckline and the outside shape. The measurement that I came up was 3 inches from the guideline of the collar. Now, you may design a collar that may be 1 inch from the guideline. It may be 2 inches from the guideline, and it may be 4 inches from the guideline. You will note that depending on how high I've gone from the guideline, the shape of the neckline changes. The higher I go, the more concave the shape of the neck. The more concave the shape of the neck, the flatter the collar will be. The least amount that I go up will produce a very slight concave, almost a straight line. And the straighter the line, the more of a roll will be arrived at the back of the neck. And the further away from the neckline the collar will be. The next collar will be utilizing the draping and flat pattern technique to arrive at a collar. And the collar that we will be draping will be the stand collar. The collar stands above the neckline of the figure. Preparation of muslin. Determine the height of the collar. And for a stand collar, 1.5 inches is about the maximum that one should design that, and it can be designed smaller. Determine the stand that you desire plus 2 inches and prepare the length of your fabric. Measure from the center back of the neckline to the center front plus 2 inches and measure the width of your muslin. Establish a center back line 1 inch from the edge and measure 1/2 inch from the lower edge. Clip the neckline and place the neckline of the collar to the center back of the form and pin the entire neckline to the new neckline of the garment. Notice that as the muslin wraps around the neck edge, the grain shifts and the center front of the collar is a different measurement up at the neckline edge as it is at the top part of the form. Indicate the center front line on the form. You may measure from the form the desired height of the collar, or you may design the collar by placing style tape around the top part of the form. The center front line may be designed to meet the center front line of the form, or it may be designed to come down on an angle away from the center front line, meeting it at the neckline, and it may be designed following a curve. There are times that the collar may be designed so it does not meet at the center front of the form. For design purposes, I remove the seam allowance at the upper edge. Removing the seam allowance allows me to see what the finished size of the collar will be. I can then evaluate the proportion of the collar to the overall design of the garment. If the style is desired where the collar will hug the figure more closely, release the pins from the collar up to the neckline edge and allow the muslin to drop down onto the body of the garment. Notice that as the collar comes closer to the neck, the grain line shifts. The original neckline has been changed. Mark the new neckline and also note the position of the collar at the center front line has been changed. Remove the collar from the form and true. Establish a new seam allowance. The position or the style of the upper edge of the collar at the center front is now lower than the back. Also, in a collar of this type, when it hugs the neckline of the figure, it is desired that the neckline or the height of the collar should be a little bit less than an inch and a half. So at this point, you may measure so that the neckline from the center front to the top ridge of the collar can be measured and adjusted so that the front and the back of the collar are the same. True the upper edge of the collar. Notice the new shape of the collar. Continuing with the stand-up collar, we will proceed to draft most of it and putting it on the figure for the final refinement. Establish the center back line on the muslin and a guideline a ½ inch up from the edge. Measure the garment neckline from center back to shoulder. Transfer the measurement to the muslin. Measure from the shoulder to the center front and transfer the measurement to the muslin. At the center front line, measure upward a ½ inch and contour the neckline, blending the raised edge with the shoulder line. Measure for the height of the collar from the neck edge and contour the shape parallel to the lower edge. Trim away the excess muslin. Establish the ½ inch seam allowance at the lower edge. and clip the neckline. Establish a 1/2 inch seam allowance at the upper curve and trim away the excess. Pin center back of collar to the back of the form, neckline to neckline, matching the shoulder and matching the center front. Notice how the muslin hugs the body of the neck, and also notice that the center front line needs to be adjusted according to the figure. You may wish to design an angle from the top edge of the collar to the center front. You may wish to round out the area, or you may plan to make the collar away from the center front. Draw that in on the form. I want to mention at this time, many times in designing, the seam allowance on the outside edge of the collar causes the proportion of the collar to look incorrect, or it would give you a false illusion of what that collar would be like. Personally, when I design, I remove that outside edge, which I will do at this time, so that I may evaluate the style, the size, and the shape of the collar. When the seam allowance is removed, the collar that you have designed is no longer a pattern. It is used only for a styling sense. If the collar is exactly as you want, and the style and the proportions and the size are of the desired amount, at that time it needs to be transferred and made into a corrected pattern with all of the seam allowance again added to the center front and the top part of the collar. The convertible collar has the characteristics of both the stand collar and the rolled collar. The first procedure to developing a convertible collar will be shown utilizing a plain drafting method. Establish a center back line on the muslin and a guide line a 1/2 inch from the lower edge. Measure the collar, the height of the stand, and the amount of the rollover, so that the collar will roll over on itself. Whatever that measurement is, add an additional 1/2 inch. And that will be the total amount of the collar. Measure the garment from the center back to the shoulder line. Whatever that measurement is, transfer the measurement from the center back on the guide line to establish a shoulder mark. Measure the garment from the shoulder on the new neckline to the center front. Transfer that measurement to the muslin. Draw the center line straight up, establish a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and trim away the excess. Clip the neck edge of the collar. Place the collar on the form, neckline to neckline, matching neckline and shoulder intersection, and center front to center front. fold the collar on itself, covering the seam allowance all the way around to the shoulder. And note that the collar, this will be the seam allowance of the collar. The collar from the center back to the shoulder folds over on itself and meets or slightly covers the center back neckline. The back portion of this collar has the characteristic of the stand collar. As the collar comes around to the shoulder, proceeding to the center front, it rolls over on the body of the garment, achieving the characteristic of the roll collar. The convertible collar has gotten its name by the fact that the convertible collar is a collar that can be worn opened or closed depending on the style of the garment. Now, the garment may have an extension with buttonholes and a little lapel, or it can have just a slash down the center of the garment, and it will still rest comfortably on the body of the garment and maintain its stand in the back. Removing the collar to emphasize the shape of this collar, you'll notice that the collar is an oblong piece of fabric, and it is the same measurement at the center back and at the center front. For economy, a collar like this would be very easy to produce and to construct. However, at times you want a collar with more variation at the center front line. And at this time we will combine the pattern making and the draping techniques to arrive at a more stylish collar. Proceed with the center back line and with a guideline at the lower edge. Measure from the center back of the garment to the shoulder, transfer that measurement to the collar muslin, and measure from the shoulder to the center front and transfer that measurement to the collar lesson. The area from the center back to the shoulder will remain the same. Decide on the height of the stand and the amount of the stand that will roll over. Draw a parallel line to the shoulder of the garment, to the shoulder of the collar muslin. Establish the seam allowance and clip the neckline edge and the area of the stand up at the top. Pin neckline of collar to the muslin. And at the center back, fold the muslin on itself to create the stand. And notice if the muslin is clipped, it will rest more easily on the garment. Fold the muslin over, and using the style tape, starting from the shoulder line, various styles may be achieved with this type of convertible collar. Now, the point of the convertible collar may be designed so that it faces the waistline. You can bring the collar over, the point of the collar over, so that it will be placed in the direction of the side seam, or the collar may be designed so that the point of the collar faces the armhole. If a wider roll is desired, then plan the muslin accordingly so that you will have more fabric to work with. When the desired style is achieved, mark the muslin remove from the figure and true. Add a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And return the muslin to the figure. And you see how utilizing both drafting and draping techniques, you can arrive at a collar quickly and achieve the style and the fit that you desire. Collars may be designed or styled on the lengthwise or crosswise grain of the goods. At times, a collar designed on the bias of the goods is desired. Collars designed on the bias utilize more goods to produce. A designer may develop a collar on the length, cross, or bias grain, and when the garment goes into production, the grain will be changed in order to produce a more efficient yield when cutting the goods. To show the design effects of collars cut on the different grains, a geometric striped fabric is used. When a collar is cut on the bias without a seam line at the center back, you will notice that as the collar meets at the center front, the grain lines will change. Part of the collar will be on the cross grain. The other part of the collar will be on the length grain. This may be a desired style effect, or it may be undesirable. For design effect where the length grains are to meet at the front, the bias cut collar needs to have a center back seam. When the bias of the seam meets at the center back, a chevron is formed, the stripes or the grain miter.